This is an introduction to week 13. In the last 2 weeks of this course, we shift our corporate attention from the nitty-gritty of a specific worship service to the metacognitive work of planning, monitoring, and assessing worship and our practice as worship planners and leaders, both short and long-term. This week, we focus on evaluating worship. Next week, we turn to our ongoing formation as worship planners, leaders, and educators in congregational and other corporate worship settings. The spiritual practice I've provided at the beginning of your work week for this week is one I've found helpful in my own practice of both giving and receiving feedback. The welcome prayer comes to us from Anglican priest Cynthia Bourgeault. Bourgeault suggests that this prayer helps imprint surrender as our innate first response to all life situations, laying down neural pathways that support a deeper flow of compassion and divine love. This is one way we can put on the mind of Christ, something that seems especially helpful when we're evaluating people and performances, including ourselves as worship planners and our performances as worship leaders. Since giving and receiving evaluation, assessment, feedback have a kind of emotive intensity, it seems wise to me to align ourselves with divine love so that minimally we do no harm and maximally, if you can say it that way, we do some good. As you think about evaluating worship in general or about this week's specific assignments, notice either emotional or physical bracing or resistance. Those are places or occasions for practicing this welcome prayer. You'll find directions for the spiritual practice under the link to this introduction. In your reading this week, you'll return to Ramshaw, who we'd laid aside for several weeks. In the chapter titled, How Might Sunday Worship Affect Daily Life?, Ramshaw proposes 12 truths of life that worshiping on Sunday could and should instill in churchgoers for the remainder of their week. In rereading this chapter, it struck me that these could provide a set of criteria for evaluating worship, and perhaps also provide a container for noticing other criteria, which are particularly relevant to our own ecclesial traditions or worship settings. Does our worship form us to eat with others, offer and receive forgiveness, live in community, face the reality of sorrow and suffering, for example? If not, is it genuinely Christian and genuinely worship? The Ruth and Hong conclusion is only 2 pages long, but use those pages as a reminder to look again at what they call the 9 qualities of contemporary worship on page 14 in the book. This is in chapter 1. Which of these qualities might you also want to include in a framework for assessing contextually attuned, transformative worship? The selection from Preparing Sunday Dinner most explicitly addresses the task of evaluating and assessing worship. Written by 3 former AMBS professors who taught an earlier version of this class, it is a practical, easy-to-read guide to collaborative worship planning and leading, with the most immediate connection to ethnic, white, middle-class Mennonite congregations. This focus is both a strength and a weakness. A strength because it's clear about its context. A weakness because that context isn't universal. Nonetheless, this book contains many practical helps for worship planners and leaders, and it provides the best selection of worship evaluation practices that I have been able to find in a concentrated form. The chapter I've assigned includes both explanatory or overview material and lists of what questions will help you think concretely about the sprawling and sometimes overwhelming task of evaluating worship thoughtfully and systematically. It will alert you to the need for both shorter and longer-term evaluative processes. And it will invite you to consider the various populations whose evaluations you want to solicit and why. It makes the case that including a range of people in evaluating worship is both important for collaborative and community reasons, and a valuable means of forming insightful and generous-minded worshipers. Finally, there's a one-page reading from the VT Worship Leaders Edition on requesting and receiving feedback about worship. To the page in VT, you could also add earlier course materials, mini lectures and assignment directions and grading rubrics, 4 principles for evaluating worship in general or specific acts of worship. Whether one person or a group oversees planning and leading a community's worship, it's easy to get stuck in the ruts of what we have always done, or what we like and want. Responsible worship planners acknowledge personal preference, but systematically evaluate worship according to whether it is sufficiently broad to be genuinely Christian and sufficiently focused to care for a particular congregation or community in a particular time and place through the lens of a set of particular biblical texts or themes. So your assignment this week is to select questions and processes that would help you do exactly this. Begin your work with the mini lecture and the readings, then create your own evaluation worksheet or handout, including rationales for your choices. You'll post your worship evaluation handout in the week's forum. Your original post is due by Sunday morning, and you'll respond to one of your colleagues by Tuesday morning. At the end of this class, I'm inviting us to consciously shift our relationships to ones less oriented by the roles of teacher and students and more focused on collegiality. One of my goals for this class is to strengthen each one of us to claim our rightful place in a community of practice. That's why, other than the final worship script, your summative project for this class, I'm grading your assignments this week and next week, pass, fail. You will pass if you do them and fail if you don't. Have a good week.